and welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour, sponsored by Lake Monster Brewing and That's Badass Wood Art. Remember to head over to that'sbadasswoodart.com. Use promo code CTPocket for 20% off any one item at their store. And while you're here, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. We're doing a giveaway once we hit 3,000 subscribers, and it's a custom Skol piece by That's Badass Wood. Joined today, if you can't tell, in the bottom, I don't know how this is going to flip on the screen, but on the bottom, it's Phil Mackey of Skor North. How are you, buddy?
Gentlemen, what's happening? It's kind of a weird dead period between the first wave of free agency and the draft here. We're like in the eye of the NFL offseason storm right now, just kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen with Dalvin, and is Danielle Hunter going to come? Is Danielle Hunter going to realize he's only going to make $4.9 million in cash and get mad about that at some point? Just a lot of things to figure out here still.
Speculation.
Yes. In fact, I did bring my button bar to the show here, so we could drop some
reckless speculation.
I'm not going to get copyright on that.
I was just going to say we're not going to get a cease and desist letter.
Yes, I'm gonna turn around and have the Skor North legal team make sure that never plays on this podcast again.
Well, you brought it up. It is a dead period right now, and I think the most relevant topic for us to talk about is what we kind of heard this morning from Florio, in that there's some chatter about Kirk Cousins to the 49ers again.
Surprise, surprise. Every offseason.
It is hilarious. So I don't know. I feel like Judd and I have kind of prided ourselves on being the first ones that stuck that flag in the ground purely speculatively in 2020. I think it was. I think Kirk was going through some bad stretch or something, and it was the pandemic, and we were like, screw this guy. This guy's he's not the franchise quarterback we all need here. And so we stumbled upon the John Lynch quotes that are now infamous, right? Where he's talking about how Kyle Shanahan was in mourning, literally said in mourning when Kirk agreed to a contract with the Vikings, because he thought Kirk would be the perfect quarterback for his system. And so it's built into our Skor North contracts. We have to talk about Kirk to the 49ers at least 5 times every calendar year now. But it really started off as like, oh, this would be an interesting theory. What if this came to fruition at some point? And this is actually the first time this Florio report, and I have the quote in front of me on his show PFT Live, where he said apparently at the scouting combine there was some chatter, some noise among people within the broader league structure. I don't even know what that means. Not media, but people in the league about Cousins being traded to the 49ers. That was a hot topic at one point in Indianapolis. This is a very couched, vague way to phrase what he's trying to say here, but he's basically saying, like, people in the league that make decisions are talking about this. This was a thing that was being talked about for a couple days. And it just kind of feels like it's a very obvious trade for both. I think the betting odds would be that it doesn't happen, but if you're the 49ers and you're sitting here in this Super Bowl window, you got one of the best teams in the NFL. You got one of these, you basically have a Ferrari and you need someone to drive it, right? And you're trying to play it off like, oh, we're totally cool with the last pick in the draft that we tricked up, Brock Purdy. He's going to totally come back from Tommy John surgery and lead us to a Super Bowl. And if he doesn't, don't worry. We signed Sam Darnold, so we've got our veteran quarterback. But it's like, there's no way they aren't nervous about their quarterback situation. And the Vikings have essentially indicated, yeah, we're just going to kind of ride it out with Kirk. We're not going to sign him to an extension. And if Kirk had to waive his no-trade clause or was asked, there's probably one team he would do it for, and it's the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan. So, I don't know. I don't think it's likely that it happens, but the fact that someone in the know, Mike Florio, brought it up and said it's not a theory, this is something that was actually talked about, is really interesting.
Well, you can kind of add a lot of things into that throughout this offseason, right? We've heard about Kevin O'Connell's comments just last week about rookie quarterback deals and the intrigue that's there. We also haven't heard firm commitments from O'Connell, Mark Wilf, Kwesi beyond 23 for Kirk Cousins. So, you might be right. Things might be adding up to, finally get the Kirk to 49er deal through.
And then the next questions would be, okay, if those teams actually talked about, like, if they really got into the weeds and said, okay, let's talk about what a deal would look like. Would the Vikings want draft capital back, or would they want Trey Lance back? And then would it turn into a 3-team trade if the Vikings aren't high on Trey Lance? Would then like Baltimore have to get involved or something, looking for a successor to Lamar Jackson? But then there's the question too, and I'd love your guys' thoughts on this. There's been some Hendon Hooker steam, for instance, and even though he's 40 years old, you'd ideally like him to sit for a year coming off the injury. He played in a really tricked up offensive system. It doesn't mean he can't learn how to do NFL things, but I think it would benefit Hendon Hooker to sit for a year, or whoever you would wind up drafting. Is it a luxury to have Kirk Cousins playing in a contract year and you can just park a young quarterback behind him? Would you rather do that? Or if you could get value for Cousins before he, walks and goes somewhere else? There's all these things they have to weigh over the next few months.
I'll let one of you two take that.
I mean, I think that's what the Vikings' ideal situation is. I think if they'd wanted to make a trade with the 49ers, obviously with Kirk's blessing, right, because of his no trade clause, that would have happened. I don't think the Vikings would have been in a situation where they would have pushed his money out into next year just to trade him now or before the draft or in the summer. Obviously, they need to see how the draft plays out, but I don't know if they would have done some of those things if their intention was to trade Kirk. I think if they were going to trade Kirk to the 49ers and the 49ers were open to that, they would have done it before signing Sam Darnold, before all this stuff happened, because they want to make their plans going into the draft. Not most of these teams, especially with the quarterback, you want to make these plans after the draft and into the summer. It's just so much work and so much movement you need to make. That'd be my guess. But I think from a Viking standpoint, I do think that they want to find a rookie quarterback to sit behind Kirk so that they can develop behind the scenes in year one and then hopefully take the reins next year. Or if they don't think that person could take the reins, that's when they make that move to desperately keep Kirk or whatever they do in next offseason. But I think they want to give themselves options. I think Kwesi's always been in that mold of, I want to keep my options open. And if we don't keep our options open, then we're stuck into having to give Kirk the money that he's been getting the last 5 years from the Vikings. And we have to give him multi-year guarantees and those types of things. And I think Kwesi wants to keep that flexibility open. So I think Hendon Hooker only gets talked to the Vikings because he's that next tier of quarterback. And I don't think it's Hendon Hooker per se. I think it's more of just hey, the Vikings are interested in a rookie quarterback, and he's the likeliest one to be there available at 23 without a trade up. Now, Will Levis is in that weird situation where maybe he slips a little bit. Maybe he does fall further than we all anticipate. But I think from a standpoint, it's the top 4 guys, and then it's everybody else. And Hendon Hooker just happens to be in that tier below those 4.
We had Chrissy Freud on last week from Sports Illustrated, and she does a bunch of stuff with the SEC. Worked really close with Mike Leach back in the day. And she was bold enough to say that, we should pump the brakes on this Hendon Hooker being bad steam, and that she actually really thinks that he could be one of the better QBs in this draft class that come out.
I mean, very literally, she asked us the question of who do we think is going to be the best out of this bunch, and she answered herself with Hendon Hooker. I said Stroud, he said Young. So she has a lot of faith. I think she maybe understands some of the nuance of these air raid offenses a little better than the common person, because she sat behind not sat behind, but was very close with Mike Leach, right? And maybe he explained some of the different nuances and how there is progressions in that system. It's not just a half field progression system, there's all these different things, and it's just that they happen to be open, so you're making that pass right away. You didn't have to make it through your progression. So she explained a little bit of that. And to go back on the Kirk stuff real quick, just speculative here. Do we make that deal to extend out push the money out, bringing that contract down to what did it end up coming down to again, for cap wise?
I think the cap is 20 million for this year, isn't it?
Yeah.
So did we do that to lower that significantly so the Niners could fit it under or inside their cap, because they're a little bit more cap strapped than to take on his full contract? They wouldn't have been able to do it. They would have had him do some restructures and whatnot to make it work. But him at 20 million, they can make that happen. So again, that's just being speculative.
Yeah, it would have to be a trade right now. So hold on, I'm on the over the cap calculator here. One of the great tools.
I'm doing it right now too.
You would actually And this is where my knowledge starts to go out the window here. But for the Vikings, it would be a much more severe cap hit for this year. You would eat the like 37 or $38.7 million. And then the Niners would be, I think the Niners would only be on the hook for the $10 million base at that point, right?
Yeah. So it'd be 10 million, the 10 million going out to the Niners, 10.25 million going out to the Niners. The Vikings would then eat that 10.25, and then the Niners would take on that 10 million.
Yeah.
But then they'd also take on how do void years
all the void years, they just all get escalated up once the player's off your team.
Yeah, they would all come off the books in 2024. So you could tack on all these void years, and then once the player's off your roster, they just like zoop into the
accelerate.
I love how now it's like we have all these tools like Over the Cap and these different websites and stuff that fans had no access to 10 years ago. Now we're all very dangerous, right? We're all like, oh, we could be Rob Brzezinski here and reshuffle this. I think I'm trying to figure out, they clearly have had a plan to clear out room for 2024 and beyond because they have some big contracts coming up.
Yeah.
And that's part of the Thielen decision to just eat the cap in 2023. It's part of saying goodbye to some other veteran players, and they might even have more, like with Za'Darius, and we'll see with Danielle Hunter. But they still have other things they could do to clear cap too, like the Brian O'Neill restructure could happen at some point.
I think they're saving that for the summer and for the in-season moves, because that's one of those, like, you want to figure everything else out about your roster, and then you have that money as like your reserve.
Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't want to pull the trigger on that because he's 28, coming off a partially torn Achilles. So do you want to shove more of that cap into now we're like way in the weeds on Brian O'Neill's cap hits,
right.
But anyways,
But I mean, and going back into the quarterback situation too, like, you take a look at some of these quarterbacks that are in the draft, like Will Levis, if he does fall to us, it's not like he's a super young prospect, right? Like,
no, not at all.
I think he's a senior, so he's definitely on the older side of a prospect, unlike Bryce Young and CJ Stroud.
It's the COVID years, Ryan. So, like,
all
these players are coming out of the COVID. So, like, Will Levis got to spend 6 years in college rather than 5 because the COVID year gave him an extra year to transfer to Kentucky and do all that stuff. And so a lot of these guys got to stay in college a little bit longer than they normally would.
Well, and then you take a look at Trey Lance. He was super young when he came out. I think he was 20. So he's about the same age as Will Levis, and he's younger than Hendon Hooker. So do you take a chance on a guy like that who at one point was a number 3 overall pick? And I mean, obviously a little bit of a projection still. You still don't know quite what you have in him after, a couple seasons of basically nothing. But like all the tools are there. I mean, he's basically Anthony Richardson, a little less athletic Anthony Richardson right now. So do you take a chance there? I don't know. I mean, I like that idea, and maybe taking up a couple of their 3rd-round picks with it and say bye, Kirk, and just on to the new.
And you know what? If you're the Vikings, you don't want to make the same mistake that the Giants are making, in my opinion, with Daniel Jones, which is, you get an offensive-minded coach, and he coaches the hell out of a quarterback and gets that quarterback from here to here.
Right.
And then instead of just trusting that your coach can do that with the next young quarterback, you go and pay $40 million for Daniel Jones. Like, if I'm the Vikings, boy, Kirk Cousins was better in the clutch, high leverage moments of games than he's ever been, except for the 4th and 8th that we all know about. Instead of throwing more money at Kirk, and it seems like they've come to the realization, don't you then just trust Kevin O'Connell and what the work that he's done with Matthew Stafford and Kirk Cousins, that he could do that with a 22 or 25-year-old quarterback too? I think you have to put some trust in.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did just go and check because I was just genuinely curious. Tanner Morgan and Will Levis are the same age, which is baffling to me because I feel like Tanner Morgan should be talked about in the same regard as like Hendon Hooker. Like, I thought he was like 25, 26 for how long he's played for the Gophers, but
their birthdays might be a little different. Like, I think Tanner Morgan's going to be 30 tomorrow. So
he Tanner Morgan, man, I think he just got picked up by a USFL team, didn't he? I think he's on a roster. Pretty sure
he was in that draft.
I think he got drafted. Yeah.
Did he? Okay.
Maybe
let's go.
He
won't
get drafted in this one, but
Phil, Matt, like, Where do you think the Vikings are right now? Like, obviously we know the defense is the talking point, mainly because they were so bad, that they've been so bad and they've been on a decline. But like, when you look at the Vikings roster, they've replaced Patrick Peterson with Byron Murphy, but then they got rid of Cameron Dantzler and Duke Shelley. They haven't replaced those guys. Obviously they have not Cam Dantzler. They have Andrew Booth Jr. and they have Caleb Evans. Like, but those are like basically the only cornerbacks on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And then they basically just replaced Marcus Davenport for Dalvin Tomlinson, and then you add Dean Lowry to that too. Like, two guys for one kind of scenario. Like, where do you think the Vikings defense is at right now? And what sort, and obviously Brian Flores is a huge part of this. Like, but what sort of like true improvement do you expect to see? And like, where do you expect to see this defense to continue to go?
Yeah, I'm actually going to zoom out and just kind of start my answer from a team perspective. And that I think going into the offseason, this is going to sound crazy because they were a 13-win team. And I don't know how many 13-win teams you can say what I'm about to say about. But they were a 13-win team with like 6 needle-moving players on it. Like 5 or 6 guys that you would say really hard to replace that guy. And I would say, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, but Justin Jefferson, I would say TJ Hawkinson, because he is one of the better pass-catching tight ends. You can't just the level went way up from Irv Smith to TJ Hawkinson.
That acquisition was huge.
Yep. The 2 tackles, Darisaw and Brian O'Neill. I think when you have the 10th-ish best quarterback in the world, as much as I rag on Kirk, you don't just like snap your fingers and find another guy who's that good. So, and then on the defensive side, maybe I would say Danielle Hunter, even though he's not quite the guy he was, is probably on that list. And then like the first 9 games of Zadarius Smith. Yeah. And I'm not saying there's not other good players, but I'm saying the other guys that are on your team, and probably Harrison Smith to some extent, even at his age. So like a handful plus 1 or 2 real needle moving players. And everybody else, especially on defense, sorry, like if you're too old or too expensive, Eric Kendricks is going to come back and probably get in the Ring of Honor at some point, but the defense is going to get better by just getting younger, faster, and more aggressively coached. I think Brian Flores comes in, and if you had the same defense, let's say it was the same defense and the guys, somehow their ages were paused, I think they're, instead of 31st in yardage, they're probably 25th. They're not as big of a train wreck. What he did in Miami when he was a head coach, they had a young train wreck defense his first year, and then overnight they became like a fringe top 5 defense. Safety blitzes, just everything. So I think the scheme, getting younger, getting faster, all those things are going to make this defense be, at least to me, closer to league average, I think. And it just becomes, for anyone that's kind of sweating like, oh my God, they let all these guys go, right? Peterson, Dantzler, Tomlinson, Duke Shelley, and Thielen and Kendricks, how are you going to replace these guys? Well, the defensive guys I just mentioned, which is most of that list, were all part of one of the worst defenses in the league. Yep, so
for sure.
It's just, I don't like, the defense is everything to me. I wouldn't have been mad about anything. If you wanted, I would have preferred to keep Harrison Smith, and they did. But if they would have said, nah, man, we're just going to, anyone whose age starts with a 3, we're just going to say goodbye, I would not have fought it at all.
Right. Well, and again, and you look at that, and that you're exactly right. That defense just did not perform well. All of these guys are replaceable. We're whining about Duke Shelley. We picked him up off the street. Like,
thank you.
Thank you. Like I'm glad he played well, and I wished him the best. But like, he got cut from the Bears for a reason. Yeah. Like, granted, he was playing in the slot there, and that's not his fit. He's outside corner, whatever. Like, you can find these guys and coach them up to be replaceable, right? Like,
and if the Vikings really wanted to bring Duke Shelley back, they would have brought Duke Shelley back.
We lost him over $100,000, right? Like,
that's the Vikings saying, "Hey, dude, please come back." But if you don't, you don't. Because if the Vikings really wanted Duke Shelley back, they would have made sure that Duke Shelley was back, the way they did all the other like low-level free agents they brought back. And that's not to shit on Duke Shelley, but like, I mean, it was a cheap deal. Like,
no, let's crap on him right now. Let's rip his ass.
But like,
too short.
But to that point, like, I mean, if you want a guy back that badly at a really important position, you would have made sure you'd pay him $1.5 million to come back. But they were like, no, we'll find a way to survive without you. Like, good luck in Vegas.
Before we round out this show, I just want to get your thoughts, Phil, on if the Vikings called you today and said, "Hey, Kwesi's sick. We need you to make the pick on draft night." Where would you go?
I would wonder how far down the list did you guys? How many guys did you whiff on? Was Tyler Fornes? Was Thor? Was Daniel Jeremiah? Were these guys all?
JR wouldn't do it, so that's one of Jordan Reed wouldn't do it. So
Yeah, exactly. Real quick before I answer that, because I pulled this up on PFF. One of my favorite Brian Flores versus Ed Donatel stats. The Miami Dolphins in Flores' last year in 2021, they ran like 150, somewhere between 150 and 200 safety blitzes. And some of those they might have had both. It might have been like everyone blitzing, and so two safeties count on the same play. But it was like 10 times a game they're sending safeties, right? Harrison Smith, I think, had 12 or 14 safety blitzes last year. Under Mike Zimmer, he was sometimes 40 or 50. So Flores loves sending safeties, and that's why it'll be fun to watch Harrison Smith, even at his advanced age in this system. Oh, yeah. Brandon Jones was a pass rusher on 93 dropbacks in 2021 for the Dolphins. So
it's going to be a whole new defense for us.
This scheme, a lot of fun too. That's the best part.
The lines might look similar, but the scheme and the aggressiveness and some of the movement, it's going to look a lot different coverage wise.
Yeah.
So who would I draft? That's
well, you don't even need to pick a specific player, but like as it stands today, obviously wide receiver is probably the top priority. They need to do something there, because I don't think any of us on this show trust KJ Osborne to be number 2. But it shouldn't even just be about KJ Osborne being number 2. He's in a rookie. He's in a contract year. I hate when people use the draft as like you got to feel it now, but no, it's about the long term. Like that's what, right?
I agree with that. I would say so. Man, quarterback is so interesting. It's so hard to know because a lot of what you're doing when you're drafting. I mean, the quarterback has to be able to. The things that you see at a pro day and on film, like can you make certain throws? There's a certain threshold you need to be at just physically. Can you make certain throws? Can you move a little bit? And those things are just sort of the reasons why these guys become first round draft, projections. The stuff that we don't get access to when Will Levis is in a room for even 15 minutes holding a football, apparently. The Vikings made him hold a football. What's he like? Is he a leader? Is he insecure? Can he process information quickly? These are things that we just don't know as largely fans and media, right? So if the Vikings drafted a quarterback in the first round, I would have to just sort of trust it because Kevin O'Connell, it's kind of like when Mike Zimmer reached for Anthony Barr and everyone was like, oh, he's kind of a fringe second round, first round guy, and they drafted him 9th overall. Well, and I get that some fans are probably disappointed with his overall career, but Anthony Barr was a beast for a couple of years, and Mike Zimmer saw something, and you just sort of trust the defensive-minded coach. So if they did draft a quarterback, I would just sort of trust, especially if they traded up, then you really know they love that quarterback. So I'm going to put quarterback aside and say if it's not a quarterback, I think wide receiver, and the guy that I keep going back to is Zay Flowers.
Welcome.
That's
welcome to the club.
Okay. This is awesome. So and again, I don't know that you need to be drafting, like Miles said, for this year's team specifically, but on deep passes last year at Boston College, this might have been spread over 2 years. No, this is from last year. So on deep passes, footballs that travel 20 yards or more in the air, 12 catches on 27 attempts, 4 touchdowns, just like a 5'10" deep threat who can make contested catches. There's a little bit of like Tyreek Hill. I don't want to go too far here, but I really like Zay Flowers. So
he's good. He's really good.
Yeah,
I guess that would be my official pick.
We went through our wide receiver rankings a couple weeks ago, and I think JSN and Zay Flowers were kind of interchangeable for a lot of us, but Zay Flowers has consistently risen on our draft boards, and he can do it all, honestly. Inside, outside, deep balls, short screens, you name it. I'm in on that. Count me in.
Big fan of Flowers for sure. I think I had a rank 2. I think I had a rank 2 after JSN. So.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting. And I think, it kind of feels like with the mock drafts that are going around, it kind of feels like a lot of the mockers have bailed on cornerback.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because they do have two young guys that they drafted. It's not like you're bringing in young guys that Rick Spielman drafted. So you've got two guys that you drafted and then a young guy that you signed. So would this front office then bring a fourth guy in with their first round pick? I think it's probably unlikely. But if a guy like Joey Porter Jr. starts falling toward 23 and he fits perfectly in Brian Flores' system, I wouldn't rule out cornerback, even though it feels like a little bit of a crowded room with the young cornerbacks. But
it's such a deep class.
Yeah.
Cornerback is such a deep class. You can get starters through day 2, I think, and I think the Vikings recognize that as well.
I think a sleeper pick is still interior defensive line.
Yes, they need a defensive tackle for sure.
And I've loved Keanu Benton, but Mozzie Smith is someone that has been slowly rising up. I just
tweeted about him, Matt.
Yeah, he's fun to watch. He's a big boy too. So
big boy.
Well, thank you, Phil, for hopping on.
Yeah.
I know it's the calm before the storm. Things are about to pick up for all of us. So
any crazy trades you think are coming our way, Vikings wise? Because we know Crazy's got to be itching, right? He's got to be.
Dude, it wouldn't shock me if they traded Danielle Hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little quiet on that front. I know I made a joke about it off the top of the show, but his base salary this year. So there's we look at cap hits because that's what you use to sort of do the math on your roster. But if you're a human being and a player, you don't really give a rip about the cap hit. You want to know what's in your pocket. And the way his contract is played out, only $4.9 million in base salary this year. And they designed it as kind of a checkpoint anyways for this offseason. But it's been very quiet on that front, and I'm assuming that Kwesi and Danielle Hunter's representatives have said, like, hey, let's just table this. We got 15 things on our to-do list. Please let us handle those. We'll get to this. But if they can't come to I don't think this comes to a head before this year's draft necessarily, but I don't know. If you're the Vikings, you have 5 draft picks, and then next year you've already traded some picks from next year's stash too, haven't you?
Yeah, they don't have a third next year. Or is it a fourth?
That's part of the Hawkinson trade. I think it's a fourth.
Yeah.
But Hunter, like Kirk, is another one. You lose money if you trade him before June 1st.
So if you waited till it was like a unique Ngakoue situation, you waited till training camp. And I guess my point is they don't have a ton of draft capital, and the only 2 guys really that you would reasonably consider trading that would get you like first or second round draft capital are Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter. Zadarius Smith. You might get a 6th or something if you could find a team. So and 29-year-old edge rushers, you can play for a few more years, but if you look historically, the elite level play starts to drop off pretty consistently at age 29 into age 30. And so if you think that you're already on the way down with Danielle Hunter, could you find a team like the Jaguars or just a team that's maybe on the cusp of getting to that next level and just need a year or 2 of a top-end edge rusher? I don't know that he fits the window. To me, the window is the ages of Hawkinson, Jefferson, Darisaw. Like, are you in your even like Byron Murphy? It's a 1-year deal. Marcus, it's like they're trying to get guys. All the free agents they've signed are basically 25 and 26 years old to align with. They're taking flyers on these guys to align them with their nucleus. And Danielle Hunter doesn't fit that age range anymore. So I wouldn't be shocked. Wouldn't be shocked.
One. And Marcus Davenport fits more of a Danielle Hunter mold than he does a Zadarius Smith mold in terms of replacement. He more is that body style of a Danielle Hunter than a Zadarius.
It's kind of amazing how like you can get like 45 or 50 pressures in a season and only have a half sack at the end of. So it's like a weird anomaly, and I wouldn't just totally. I know a lot of the analytics, and I'm one of these guys like sacks don't matter. It's pressures that matter. Well, but pressures matter more than sacks, but. How about more than a half sack? Can we?
Yeah.
Can we?
Oh, for sure.
Get a handful would be nice.
Well, you heard it here first. Danielle Hunter is going to be traded. I'm down for that. Not many moves I'd be opposed to at this point.
Clickbait. So. We're just generating clickbait here.
Hey, and if they don't take a quarterback this year, that's ammo for next year, right? Like
that's true.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. You need to, and especially I don't know if they have any grand illusions about, let's say in 2024. They finish with 9 wins or 10 wins this year, and they're drafting 18th or something, and you want to get up to number 2 to get Drake May, right? Well, you better have some you better be willing to unload 3 first-round picks and maybe some other stuff.
Yep.
So you got to get some draft capital in the stable.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Phil. It's always fun chatting Vikings football with you. And if for everyone listening, obviously you probably follow Phil Mackey, but if you don't, go do so. But remember that Skor North has a draft party this year at Park Tavern. That's in St. Louis Park, right?
St. Louis Park off of Louisiana, near 7. And yeah, April 27th at 6 o'clock, the Surly Park Tavern draft party. So it should be a blast.
Fun time. The one last year was fun too, though. It was a little cold. So
we moved it indoors this year, at least. There's an outdoor area that we'll spill over into, but it's sort of enclosed in a tent. Yeah, when the freezing rain hit right after the Vikings traded back 20 slots, people were like, "What is happening right now?" But it was fun.
Well, make sure you guys hit up that this year, and please like and subscribe. We got a ton more content coming up until the NFL draft, which includes SB Nation's JP Acosta, who Miles and I had the privilege of meeting down at the Senior Bowl. So more draft conversation coming your way. But until next time, everybody, Skol Vikings.